Okay, thank you also for those who are joining online. And as with the previous session, the live stream is being monitored by a student in the room. So if you have questions or comments, please feel free to enter them into the chat. Our next session is a lecture by our colleague Achamyeleh Debela. And the talk will be about 45 minutes, and then we'll have some time for questions and discussion. And after the talk ends, we have a shuttle that's ready to take our speakers up to Oklahoma City, and we will have an event, a gathering at the gravesite of Gebre Kristos Desta. Everyone is invited to that, so if you want to drive yourselves, just check in with me before we leave and I'll send you the address. I would take up all of Acha's speaking time if I read his full resume and bio, because he's so accomplished. So I encourage you to look in the program where there is an extended bio, but I just want to highlight a few details about his illustrious career. He originally began his training at the School of Fine Arts in Addis, where he worked with the artist who is the subject of our event, Gebre Kristos Desta. In his early career, he worked as a designer for the art and publication department of the Ethiopian tourist organization. He then undertook further study in Zaria, Nigeria, before moving to the United States and studying at Morgan State in Baltimore, Maryland, and then earning a Master's of Fine Arts at the Maryland Institute College of Art, often known as MICA, where he worked with Grace Hartigan, an important abstract painter. And since 1990, Acha has served as a professor of art and computer graphics at North Carolina Central University in Durham, North Carolina. And he is now an emeritus professor from that institution. And I also want to thank Acha for having some really key conversations with Kate and I as we were planning the symposium. It was really helpful to bounce ideas and brainstorm together. Acha has both exhibited internationally and co-curated internationally with an illustrious career that makes it not a surprise that in 2024, the Ethiopian Academy of Sciences elected him an associate fellow, and he was honored in Ethiopia as the recipient of the National Meritorious Award, Yabegosu. So with that, I will welcome Acha to the stage, and we'll look forward to hearing your discussion. Thank you.
I must say, you should have such a friend to give you all the accolades. I would like to first acknowledge Gebre Kristos and be religious about it. I would like for us to take just 1 minute to remember him. And thank you. I think I would get something. Thank you. I hope you are ready to get bored. It's going to be a long one. Sequencing might also be a little bit of a difficulty, but I think you will see all the slides that may be of interest. The human story behind the canvas, a life that transcends its own telling. There are some things that I added. Perhaps people have said that he's a teacher, a poet, a painter, and a diplomat. There are lives that exceed the boundaries of biography. There are stories that cannot be contained within the orderly procession of dates and exhibitions, awards and academic credentials, stories that spill beyond every frame we construct for them. Poet, teacher, cultural ambassador, Kristos Desta, ultimately a refugee, is precisely such a story. It is a story about the extraordinary moral courage required to perceive the world differently, to render that difference in color and line and verse, and to insist, even in the face of exile and untimely death, that the search must go on. To write about Gebre Kristos Desta is, in the most intimate sense, to write about Ethiopia itself. Its ancient spiritual inheritance, its turbulent political history, its fierce and abiding pride, and its restless, sometimes anguished encounter with modernity. It is right about the universal human condition, the longing to belong, the necessity of breaking free, the dignity of creative labor, and the irreplaceable value of the artist as witness. Prophet and bridge builder between cultures and across generations. This essay is an attempt to honor that life fully, at least an attempt. Not merely as an art historical record, but as a deeply human narrative. It is an argument that art, at its most authentic, is the most honest diplomatic language humanity possesses. And it is a declaration that Gebre Kristos Desta is not a figure consigned to the past. He is a living inheritance, a timeless heritage, whose voice grows more necessary with every passing generation. The soil from which he grew, Ethiopian, art and its sacred roots. To understand Gebre Kristos Desta, one must first understand the world into which he was born, a world in which art was not decoration, not commodity, not even entertainment. Art, but a prayer made visible. Ethiopian art stands among the oldest and most spiritually current visual tradition in human history. Its development is inseparable from the political and religious narration of the Ethiopian state itself, formation of the Ethiopian state itself. The the conversion of King Ezana in approximately 400 AD introduced an early Christian iconographic vocabulary that over the following centuries merged with indigenous aesthetic sensibilities, Byzantine structural forms, and the distinctive spiritual temperament of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church to produce something entirely its own, so says Shonaki, a Polish writer. Manuscript illuminations, wall murals, icons, and devotional paintings, many dated as early as the 13th century, bear witness to a visual culture of extraordinary depth and continuity. These works are preserved today in the National Museum of Ethiopia, the Institute of Ethiopian Studies, that is, at the Addis Ababa University, and in collections scattered across Europe and America. What distinguishes this tradition was not merely its beauty, but its function. In a society where the vast majority of the population was illiterate, art served as the primary instrument of the religious education. I have to qualify the word illiterate simply because of the perhaps the similarities with other civilizations and how that is related to the discovery of related intellectual claim. These works are preserved today. What is the church understood with remarkable sophistication that the eye could carry the soul where the written word could not reach. As Shonaki observed, Ethiopian religious art was more than realism. It was abstract in the most profound sense, a prayer in color. It encompassed, signified, and allegorized supernatural reality through the visible world. It was the gospel rendered in image. The artist who produced this sacred work, the Deptara, was himself a clergyman, shaped by the same theological convictions that animated its patrons and his public. This unity of artists, patron, and community created a remarkable social coherence. The Deptara worked without existential conflicts because he shared the faith. He was allied to express. His art was not self-expression, as we know art to be within the Western world. In the modern sense, that is, it was communal expression, a collective act of devotion in which the individual hand served a transcendental purpose. This is a crucial, my apologies. This is crucial point and frequently misunderstood, one that is frequently misunderstood within Western art historical frameworks. The apparent anonymity of traditional Ethiopian religious art is not a sign of artistic suppression, but of artistic integration. The artist was not absent from the work, he was dissolved into it. In the way that a musician is dissolved into his music, or monk, or work into prayer, or the monk into his prayer. The shift from sacred to secular, from devotion to patronage. Beginning in the 18th century, the state and nobility, growing in confidence and ambition, asserted themselves as patrons alongside the church. Kings and members of the aristocracy began to appear on the same pictorial stage as saints in the Holy Family, a development that was not merely aesthetic, but profoundly political. Art was being recruited into the servitude of, into the service of power. The relationship between Emperor Haile Selassie and the arts, in particular, instructive portraits and mural depicting him as King of Kings, elect of God, and Lion of the tribe of Judah, appeared prominently in churches, public buildings, and official space through Addis Ababa and beyond. The legendary story of Solomon and Sheba, that foundational narrative of Ethiopian royal legitimacy, was actively promoted, not primarily for its artistic merit, but for its political utility, as a continuous reaffirmation of the Solomonic dynasty's claim to divine authority. At the same time, a commercialized folk art tradition developed to serve the growing tourist market. My apologies for the sort of confusion here. I was beginning to talk about Gebre Kristos' early experience, so I'll jump into that. Gebre Kristos Desta was born in 1932 in Hara, the ancient walled city of eastern Ethiopia, a place of extraordinary cultural richness, a crossroads of Islamic and Christian tradition, a city that has always carried within it the memory of multiple worlds. It is perhaps not coincidental that a man who would spend his lifetime building bridges between traditions, between the ancient and the modern, between Africa and Europe, between the middle and the invisible, the visible and the invisible, was born in a city that had always been a meeting place of civilizations. His father, Aleka Desta, was a clergyman and a graphic artist, a man who embodied the traditional Daptara role with evident mastery and devotion. Trained in the church school, Aleka Desta was deeply versed in the clerical literature and religious art of the Ethiopian Coptic Orthodox Church. He copied religious manuscripts with illumination depicting events from the Old and New Testaments, the lives of the saints, and other traditional themes. He made his own parchment and ink, wrote with quills, and decorated the book with vignettes of the Madonna, the Christ figure, and angels. The young Gebre Kristos watched all this. He absorbed it. He was from the very beginning a child who perceived the world through the eyes of an artist. But because he was taught to be, but because he could not help it. In his own words, recalled in an interview with Sidney Head within the USIS, I believe at the time, in 1969, he says, "My father used to write the Holy Book, copying the gospel for the church. There were printing presses, but the tradition was to have the book written by hand. He made his own parchments and ink and wrote with quills. He also decorated the books with vignettes of the mother, the Christ figure, and angels. So I was watching that. He really encouraged me. I was always painting. This is a passage of extraordinary tenderness. In it, we see not only the origin of an artistic vocation, but the transmission of a cultural inheritance, father to son, hand to eye, generation to generation. The young Gebre Kristos watching his father quill move across parchment is an image that carries with the entire history of Ethiopian art, the devotion, the craft, the spiritual seriousness, and the understanding that making marks upon a surface is an act of profound significance. By the age of 6, Gebre Kristos had already produced a pencil drawing of sufficient quality that he would include it entitled Maternity in his 1977 retrospective, which we saw earlier with Konjit's presentation from his self-curated catalog. A declaration: the artist was present from the very beginning. Gebre Kristos completed his elementary education in Harar before moving to Addis Ababa. By the way, he also did these scripts and illuminations for books, especially prayer books for Ras Makonnen, the father of Emperor Haile Selassie. That means he was that good. He subsequently enrolled in science department at Haile Selassie First University, now Addis Ababa University, where his family practiced practical people in a country where 90% of the population was agrarian, hoped he would become a professional farmer. That is a wish that the family had. But the artist in Gebre Kristos could not be contained by agricultural sciences. His spare time was spent reading everything he could find about art. He painted whenever he could. He was up to his sophomore year at Haile Selassie University, entirely self-taught. And yet, the works he produced during this period reveal a sensibility already fully formed, already morally serious, and already committed to bearing witness to the world as it actually was. What Gebre Kristos saw in Addis Ababa during this time, these years, was not the Ethiopian of imperial portraits and Solomon and Sheba legends. He saw unemployment. He saw begging. He saw prostitution and disease. He saw the stark unadorned reality of human suffering. I look like the dollar counter in the Mercato. The protruding bones of the hungry, the hollow eyes of the dispossessed, the quiet dignity of people reduced to the margins of a society that preferred not to see them. However, Gebre Kristos made sure he observed. Not only did he observe, but he also painted them, drew them, and wrote poetry about them. The impact of this observation produced a series of paintings executed between 1950 and 1953. Poor family, beggars, Me'emanan, works of raw emotional power that were exhibited at the United States Information Service Library in 1954, where Gebre Kristos was employed as an illustrator of children's book. This is the connection with the Oklahoma situation. These early works are remarkable not only for their technical accomplishments, but for their moral courage in a cultural environment that preferred art to serve the purpose of the powerful. The young Gebre Kristos was already insisting that art must serve the purpose of the truth. This was not political position in any narrow sense. It was a deeply human one. Gebre Kristos was not a propagandist. He was a witness, and the witness, as the poet Caroline Forsch has written, is not neutral. The witness is one who refuses to look away. Between his departure from the university and his scholarship abroad, Gebre Kristos moved through a series of positions that speak to both his practical resourcefulness and his restless intellectual energy. He worked in the soil analysis chemical laboratory of the Imperial Ethiopian Government Highway Authority. He served as an apprentice engineer in the geological department of the State Bank of Ethiopia. He taught English, geography, and general science at the Sibiste Nagasi Elementary School. He illustrated children's book for the US government-sponsored Point 4 education program. Each of these experiences added a layer to the man he was becoming, but none of them could satisfy the fundamental drive that animated his life. He wanted to be an artist, fully, professionally, without compromise. And he was willing to sacrifice the security of a conventional career to pursue that calling, even at the expense of disappointing some of his relatives who wanted him to be a farmer. During these years, Gebre Kristos, that doesn't mean that they didn't support him later when they realized what he meant. During these years, Gebre Kristos also faced a deeply personal crisis. In his early 20s, he began to develop an alteration of his skin pigmentation, a condition that would mark him for the rest of his life, and that became, in his own understanding, a turning point. the experience of this visible difference of carrying upon one's body a sign of otherness resonates with particular poignancy in the context of his later life as an exile and a refugee. The body, like the canvas, became site of meaning, a surface upon which the world inscribes its judgment and upon which the artist must find a way to respond. In 1957, Gebre Kristos Desta won a scholarship that would transform his life and ultimately the history of Ethiopian art. From 1957 to 1961, he studied painting and graphic arts at the Academy of Art in Cologne, West Germany, graduating at the top of his class. For his outstanding achievement, he was awarded a private studio to support the further development of his work. Actually, when he graduated, not only did he produce works in his studio, but also was able to travel around Europe to see what else was going on. Germany in the late 50s was a place of extraordinary artistic ferment. The wounds of the Second World War were still fresh, and European art was grappling with questions that went to the very heart of what it means to be human. Questions about suffering and survival, about the limits of representation, about whether beauty was still possible after catastrophe. Abstract expressionism, which had emerged in New York in the 1940s, was reshaping the global conversation about what painting could do and be. In Germany, Gebre Kristos encountered the work of Wassily Kandinsky. I think I have an example of Kandinsky's piece. The Russian abstractionist who had argued with philosophical rigor that color and form could carry spiritual meaning independent of any representational content. He encountered the German expressionists who had used distortions and intensity of color to express psychological and emotional state that realism could not capture. These encounters were not merely educational. They were revelatory. Gebre Kristos recognized in abstract art a language that could do what he needed art to do. Go beyond the surface of things, beyond the merely visible, and into the realm of what he called what is beyond. He embraced this new language with the wholehearted commitment of someone who has found, after a long search, the medium that is truly his own. I'm sorry. His canvases from the German period are described as cool and nostalgic. I'm sorry I was unable to find examples, but these are really very interesting in terms of the choice of color, the environment that he was in, and it was not as cool or cold as in Ethiopia, which is 60 to 80. As for those of you who have been there, you would know. It also reminds me of the 13 months of sunshine. Ato Habte Selassie, the minister of the tourism, was confronted with the tourists who complained. They came to Addis and it was raining. So in order to prove to them that it is 13 months of sunshine, all he has to do is take them to Nazareth. And it was sunshine. So anyway, environment makes a big difference. When asked why he had chosen abstract art, Gebre Kristos offered an answer that is both intellectually precise and deeply poetic. He said, "If an artist were to devote his artistic life to the reproduction of figures and forms as they exist, he would be competing with the camera, which is best suited for this type of production. An artist goes beyond the matter of the story, and therefore the realistic is insufficient. The artist seeks to find another language to express what is beyond. This could be the reason for abstract painting." This is a statement of artistic philosophy that deserves to be read slowly and carefully. Gebre Kristos is not dismissing realism. He is identifying its limits. He is arguing that the artist's fundamentally task is not reproduction but revelation, the making visible of what cannot be photographed, what cannot be measured, what exists in the space between the visible and the invisible, between the known and the unknown. This is the deepest sense of a continuation of the Ethiopian artistic tradition he inherited from his father. The Daptara, after all, was not trying to reproduce the visible world. He was trying to make the invisible world visible. To paint prayer, imagine. Bakala put it as transcendental. This is a question of thinking beyond. To paint a prayer, to render phase in color. Gebre Kristos was doing the same thing like his dad did, but with a new vocabulary, a new set of tools, and a new understanding of what the invisible world contained. After graduating from the Cologne Art Academy, Gebre Kristos held his first solo exhibition at the Gallery Cooper in Cologne, a successful show that followed a year of intensive work and an extensive 6 months tour of Western Europe, during which he visited art schools, academies, museums, and galleries. He was preparing himself not merely as a painter, but as a cultural ambassador, someone who would carry what he had learned back to Ethiopia and share it with the next generation. Gebre Kristos Desta returned to Ethiopia in 1962. He joined the faculty of the School of Fine Arts at Addis Ababa, and in 1963, that was my first year, presented his work to his people in a one-man show at the school. It was a moment of enormous significance and enormous difficulty at the same time. The reception was not what he expected or what he might have hoped. Critics were quick to accuse him of having abandoned his Ethiopian roots in favor of a foreign art form. Imagine among the intellectuals in Addis at the time, even if one person were to write a critic in one of the major newspapers, that was enough for somebody to just pick that up and create labels after labels that could ruin an artist's life. They said he had returned with something alien, something that had no place in Ethiopian tradition. The accusation was not merely aesthetic, it carried a charge of cultural betrayal. The suggestion that by embracing abstraction, Gebre Kristos had somehow ceased to be authentically Ethiopian. I dare say there is no Ethiopian like Gebre Kristos. At least he has proved it in many ways. His response was characteristically direct, intellectually rigorous, and deeply human. He said, "It is funny that people who know nothing about the history of art attach such exaggerated importance to the art of their own country. They do not realize how international art really is. Picasso would hardly have created his cubism had he not seen African art. Matisse was influenced by Islamic traditions. Gauguin went as far as Tahiti to find new inspiration. We create ultra-modern houses within the context of Ethiopia in our developing countries. He builds superhighways. We build superhighways on which we drive the latest model cars from all over the world. We use all sorts of up-to-date international styles in technology, science, education, medicine, and what have you. Why in the world, he did not say, why in the hell I would have said that. Why in the world should our art be different? This is from the interview that the Sydney Head had with him in 1969. This is one of the most important statements in the history of African modernism. It is not merely a defense of abstract art. It is a defense of the African artist's right to full participation in the global conversation of human creativity. An argument against the double standard that celebrates Western artists for being influenced by African art, condemning African artists for being influenced by Western art. It is at its core an argument for the equal humanity of the African creative mind. The critic Solomon Desta, writing in African Arts 1966-67, came to Gebre Kristos's defense with equal eloquence, pointing out the Ethiopian art has always been in its own very abstract. How much, he says, this is quoting Solomon, how much more abstract can one get than the non-figurative Ethiopian manuscript illuminations? Or the steles of Aksum, which are skyscrapers complete with windows and doors, but are definitely closed to anyone trying to penetrate their mystery. Of course, Desta, 1966-67. Desta's observation is brilliant in its simplicity. The critics who accused Gebre Kristos of abandoning Ethiopian tradition for foreign abstraction had, in their haste to condemn, forgotten what Ethiopian tradition actually was. The steles of Aksum, those magnificent monolithic towers carved with architectural precision, pointing towards a sky that holds no answers, are among the most abstract objects ever created by human hands. The manuscript illumination of the Ethiopian church, which their flattened figures, their symbolic colors, and their rejection of perspective in favor of spiritual hierarchy, are as far from photographic realism as anything produced by Kandinsky or modernism. Further, Solomon wrote, the Ethiopian church art, which is regarded as an important part of our cultural heritage and which I am accused of, this is Gebre Kristos, which I am accused of discarding in favor of foreign styles. This supposedly indigenous art actually is Byzantine in style. It too incorporates foreign characteristic elements and arrives perhaps at a characteristically Ethiopian synthesis. Now, the same thing will happen in the present age. 50 years from now, we may see a new Ethiopian tradition evolving, one that draws on what the rest of the world has to offer, but which is more than the sum of its parts. This is a prophecy as much as a defense, and it has proven in the decades since the death to be entirely accurate, since his death. The contemporary Ethiopian art scene, vibrant, internationally engaged, technically sophisticated, and deeply rooted in Ethiopian experience, is precisely the tradition that Gebre Kristos envisioned and helped to create. To understand Gebre Kristos Desta as an artist, one must spend time with his paintings, not merely looking at them, but listening to them. In the way that one listens to music or poetry. His mature work is characterized by a number of recurring visual elements that function in his own description as a symbolic language, a vocabulary of form that communicates at a level deeper than narrative, deeper than illustration, deeper than the merely visible. Perhaps the most distinctive element of Gebre Kristos' visual vocabulary is the circle. It appears throughout his work, in the non-figurative abstractions, in the semi-abstract figurative paintings, in works from different periods and different emotional registers. It is not a decorative element. It is a philosophical statement. The circle. This is Gebre Kristos, an interview with David Talbot in 1966. The circle is infinite, unending. It symbolizes the hemisphere and heavenly bodies. It is in line with the search for a solution in life. When it frequently happens that one may believe he has reached the optimum solutions, only to find, since art is life itself, that the search must continue. A perfect solution remains forever elusive. The circle, he says, are symbols of universal things. Things like mouse, earth, the sun, and more. Importantly, they also make interesting patterns. You see? So for the artistic style, that is. The circle in virtually every human culture carries the weight of the infinite. It is the shape of the sun and the moon, of the eye and the mouse, of the earth seen from space and the drop of water seen under a microscope. It is the shape of wholeness and of the void, of completion and endless return. In Gebre Kristos' work, it becomes a leitmotif, a recurring signature that ties together works produced across decades and in radically different emotional context. Green abstract, which you see here, is perhaps the most celebrated expressions of this visual philosophy. Gebre Kristos builds his composition around a focal shining center, a core of vibrating energy from which crystallizing waves radiate outwards. Suspended in luminous space, the soft blending of light and dark surfaces creates an interplay of forms that is simultaneously dynamic and serene. It is painting that rewards sustained attention. The longer one looks, the more one sees, and the deeper one is drawn into the conversation between color, form, between visible and the invisible. There is another one, which I have only in black and white. The blue abstract continues this very same exploration, but with a different emotional temperature. The texture is more dramatic, the lines more diffused, and the impasto technique heavier and more insistent. Where green abstract invites contemplation, blue abstract demands engagement. It is painting that pushes back, that refuses to be merely beautiful, and that insists on its own complexity. Witness to mortality. If the circle is Gebre Kristos' symbol of the infinite, the skeleton in his symbol of the moral and the mortal and of the moral. From his earliest works in Addis Ababa through the German period and into the mature abstract work, the skeleton recurs as a visual motif that refuses to let the viewer forget the fragility of human life and the reality of human suffering. In the early paintings, such as the poor families that we saw with the earlier Konjit's presentation, the beggars and Menan, the skeleton are literally protruding bones visible beneath the skin of the hungry and the dispossessed. They are images of social witness, of moral expressed through visual means. But as Gebre Kristos' work evolved, the skeleton becomes more abstract, more symbolic, a pretense felt rather than seen, a reminder that beneath every surface, beneath every beautiful arrangement of color and form, there is the bare fact of mortality. Solomon Desta, in his analysis of Gebre Kristos' poetry, noted that his poetic lines had the dagger capacity to stab, and bare lines reminiscent of the skeletons in his paintings. Of course, this is a profound observation about the unity of Gebre Kristos' creative vision. Whenever working in paint or in words, he was always doing the same thing, striping away the comfortable surfaces of life to reveal the essential surfaces beneath. In 1969, Gebre Kristos introduced a new theme in his work, television. Perhaps it is not in this one. There. This actually is called television, an abstract representation of the flickering colors and images of the television screen, reduced to fused lines and colors. This is a fascinating work, both for what it reveals about Gebre Kristos' engagement with the modern world and for what it suggests about his understanding of abstraction. Television in 1969 was a new and powerful force in human experience, a technology reshaping how people understood reality, how they received information, and how they related to the world beyond their immediate surroundings. Gebre Kristos' decision to paint it is not concession to modernity, but an engagement with it, an attempt to find in the abstract language he has developed a way of capturing the experience of a world increasingly mediated by screens and images. Late Evening Sun, there is such a painting, but it's not in this one, but you will see it later. But for comparison reasons, produced the same year, represents the other pole of his engagement, the natural world, the ancient rhythms of light and darkness, the simple and irreducible beauty of the sun going down. Together, these two works from 1969, I'm sorry about one that is not here, suggested the full range of Gebre Kristos' artistic concern, the ancient and the modern, the natural and the technological, the eternal and the ephemeral. Kindly remind me of my time. Gebre Kristos Desta was not only a painter, he was a poet, and his poetry, like his paintings, was both a continuation of and a departure from the tradition he had inherited. Traditional Amharic poetry is characterized by formal regularity, by a kind of stately dignity that Solomon Desta compared to the poetry of Alexander Pope, polished and measured, operating within established conventions of rhythm and theme. Gebre Kristos broke from this tradition as decisively as he had broken from the tradition of Ethiopian religious painting. He introduced new rhythm, multiple dimensions, fragmented images, and a spare, almost skeletal quality that his critics found baffling and his admirers found electrifying. As was earlier well articulated, he was painting with words, the brush strokes that my teacher earlier described. Desta, writing in African Arts, observed, Gebre Kristos Desta, a painter who is perhaps overly cerebral on canvas, is so far the only Ethiopian poet who unwittingly or not has unleashed a raging controversy in the local papers as to whether his poems are poems at all. It is difficult to believe that the journalists fail to see the sparse beauty of his rhythm in several dimensions. So you could say he was the only painter who painted with words like he did his brush strokes on the canvas. The poem To a Painting, translated by Solomon Desta, is perhaps the most complete expression of Gebre Kristos' artistic philosophy. It deserves to be read if I am allowed to. All right. All right. For interest of time, I would like to give this to you so that you can ask some questions. But I also advise that you read his poem To a Painting. People think he's talking about to a painting, but he was not at all. He was addressing a whole different philosophy in terms of what it means. This poem that I am talking about is a manifesto. It is a description of the creative process as Gebre Kristos understood and lived it, not as a series of finished products, but as an endless journey, a continuous act of questioning and searching beyond what is known, the repetition to search, to search, to search, to go, are not failure of craft, but the deliberate enactment of the relentless of the creative drive that poem does not resolve. It cannot resolve because the journey, as Gebre Kristos insists, with both the first and the last line, has no end. I will stop here. Thank you.
We have a couple minutes for questions, people or comments, and what would like to ask, and maybe there's something in the chat.
While we do that, I will also
There's
show you
accolades coming into
some
the
more of,
chat for you.
yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
There's a question.
How is the poetry received in, I guess, different countries? And like, was he publishing it in journals, or was he just writing it on his own?
They were published in Ethiopia, I know, and also they were published after I think his death. There was a special edition that was edited by one of the guests here, who did a wonderful work of compiling most of his works, at least that were available to her at the time. Madam Saraka Brhan, would you raise your hand? There she is, hiding. So she may address some of it tomorrow, I am sure. But all the same, there are a few magazines within West Africa. I haven't seen anything in Europe, maybe here in the States. But it is something to really think about in terms of discovering more and making them available to the rest of the world. Yes.
Also, Chris Paquette and Alamuta Debela translated some of his poetry in the anthology which was published in 2022.
That's true. The one that your poetries were also published. Yes. Yeah, that is a good observation, which is I think can be available through the Google and Amazon, hopefully. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you. This was a wonderful lecture. I wonder if you could speak. There's a photograph on the screen there about Gebre Kristos' relationship to Emperor Haile Selassie, because as you laid out at the beginning, he had no desire to be merely a kind of servant of power, and yet he had a relationship with the emperor such that he was given the
Yeah.
prize. So perhaps you could speak a little to that.
Yeah, independent of the emperor, his scholarship came through his own efforts, I think. But it is respectful of any artist of the period if they can be accepted, and the public, if they knew that the emperor came to a show, you have more chance of being more popular. But he may not even have that idea in his mind. But he came, he used to come to the opening of student exhibitions. In fact, this was my first year in the art school. And when he came, I mean, it's a big deal at the opening. And most of the ministers come, as well as also he was also trying to get the idea of modern art, and he was trying to explain to the emperor what it meant to be an artist of that level of the expression. So he went around and tried to explain the best he can about his paintings to the emperor. And that sort of, I think, gave the emperor an idea of what change is, because he has always been supporting the arts. He's been sending students abroad. Achamyeleh Debela was given the opportunity to go to the San Francisco art school. Many others had this opportunity, not just the emperor who started it, but even during Menelik period. Many artists are being sent out, or at least so that they can get ideas about the rest of the world and come back and share their experience. Yes.
Yeah, I was wondering, what's the relationship between Alexander Bogosian and Professor Desta as far as the abstract drawings concerned? Some people, Alexander Bogosian was first. I don't know what the relationship is.
Gebre Kristos came back in, I think, 1961. Bogosian came a little later. There was no, at least as students, we always create a camp, favorite students or favorite teacher kind of thing. And myself and a few others were a favorite of Gebre Kristos. And then there were some that actually went with Skunder. So there were studios, each of them had a studio on campus. And if, in fact, Ato Achamyeleh Debela gave a studio as I was about to graduate for a year, and it was next door to Gebre Kristos. In fact, he was the one who suggested that I get that section. But in terms of relationships, I think they each had their own approach to the public and their own lifestyle. Gebre Kristos, in that case, was, you could say, conservative, not to appear in public with, he was invited to some. He was very selective as to which embassy invites him for a cocktail and all that. Whereas Alexander Skunder went to quite a lot of them and was getting popularity in that way, I think. So one was more conservative, you could say, in his public life, whereas the other one is quite different. Even with students, that is the difference. I don't know if I answered your question. Yes.
I'd just like to say something about timing here, because Kristos was 6 years older than Skinder, and I was exactly the same age as Skinder, which is the only reason I know that, But what it meant was, when Skinder came back to Ethiopia from Paris, Gebre Kristos was already established,
Yeah.
authority in the arts. But Skinder did not stay very long.
Yeah,
He's only there
3
for
years.
3 years, right. So then when he leaves, he also leaves a vacancy behind, right? So his actual career in Ethiopia was short, and Gebre Kristos preceded it and also followed him. So I think that makes a difference in how we understand the give and take of that.
And yeah, I don't think it would add any value to what I'm about to tell you. The lifestyle was different. Skonder was outgoing. Skonder and his students and who were around there were very much happy-go-lucky, you could say. They drank a little bit. They used, those. Even if he drank, Gebre Kristos was very private. So the age difference, yes, that's a very good thing. The establishment of authority or legacy within the school, because Gebre Kristos not only taught there, but for 12 years, he was also director of the school for a while. Gebre Kristos, even in the middle of the Red Terror and all that, he actually initially went with students to the countryside to guide them so that they can. He was continuously supportive of their activities, whereas Skonder has already left at that time. Go ahead.
Spoke about Solomon's articles in African arts, or his letter from Addis Ababa in African arts. And I want to tell you how that happened, because I think it matters in terms of the communication system. African arts was established during the post-colonial years.
Yeah.
And African arts generally were becoming popularized in that period in the West. And UCLA, which published African arts, I don't know if they sent somebody, but there was somebody in Addis Ababa who knew about that magazine and asked around who we should talk to about who should write about the letter from Addis Ababa. And I was fairly new in Ethiopia at the time, but I had gotten to know Solomon, and I had a lot of long discussions with him because I love to talk a lot. And so the question came to me. It went to a lot of people, I think, but it came to me about who would you recommend? And I thought Solomon was obvious. And so he wrote it, and it was published. But my point is simply that there was an interest in this coming to Ethiopia from outside and asking about it. And that gave a voice to it. And that's the voice that then within Ethiopia was listened to. So there's this kind of communication.
It's a good point, but it didn't take away from Skonder, because Skonder was very popular. And in his own way, it has contributed tremendously to contemporary African art. But all the same, I think they have advantages and disadvantages, articles outside of the country. I served as an editorial council with the African Studies since 1973 on up. But what is important is that that was serving not just only Ethiopia, but the whole of Africa. So there were certain people who took it upon themselves that they would choose and select which artists should be, popularized. But that is a whole different political framework. Any other question? Yes.
I have a very Oklahoma question. So I was really interested to learn that Gebre Kristos worked in relation to the Point Four program in the 1950s. Was then he aware of the OSU and Ethiopia exchange that was just beginning in that period, do you think?
No, I had only two conversations with Gebre Kristos since he came to Oklahoma. He didn't mention any of that. But what is how would you say agatami? Some kind of providence. I think we can take it that way. That he would not have chosen had he been given the opportunity to where to go to the U.S. He may not have, but the interference of the father who actually was willing to get him over here. That is, I think, the reason. He would not have been a refugee to begin with. He has served Ethiopia as an ambassador of culture to many, many countries. Not only did he exhibit his own work in these countries, he also took traditional Ethiopian art and introduced to many, many countries that he traveled, with the request of the Ministry of Education, financing part of his expenses, although he had to write a letter to justify. And there you have to see the documents that he left behind in terms of how he went by, even with Africa Union, this situation where they took his painting for an exhibition, and it's called The Mask. And when they returned it, it was broke. And the Ghanaian embassy was adamant not to pay. So Gebre Kristos insisted that I am leaving a legacy to other artists that you have to pay, that if you have taken the responsibility. So nobody knows these kinds of things. So that hopefully, I will finish the paper some other time, but there are certain aspects of his life that he did not just only work for Gebre Kristos, but also leaving a respectful legacy for other artists. That's part. Yeah.
I got another question. Seems about working with an educator. He's talking about likability, but also putting this here in Oklahoma, he was very involved in the culture and the community. Can you talk just a little bit about him as an educator, and what was his teaching style, and how did he get feedback? As a person?
Yeah, the person, as I mentioned earlier, he approached teaching a little differently. He was not necessarily, he will follow some curriculum because he went through that and he saw quite a bit in Europe when he was a student. But his policy was that he would point to areas where you are weak and show you how you can improve on it by not chastising you as some teachers do, but he will give you an example. So he taught by example also. He lived his life by example. So it is important as a teacher, at least I learned from it. I always tried to make my students understand that I am just facilitating their education. So that was very important. It is important that also he took time with his students, individually, also other group. But he will explain something very thoroughly, and then if you ask a question to which he has labored to explain, he would simply say, Al-Nagr. I think you are asking an area that I have really tried. You are here to observe, to learn. Therefore, you need to take notes of some of these ideas. So I'm not going to tell. So you see, I ain't telling. Al-Nagr. So, yes.
Let us please thank Professor Debela.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Just a couple of quick logistical announcements now. For those of you who are not joining for the Oklahoma City portion of the afternoon, we will see you back here in the morning at 9 for breakfast, and the first panel starts at 9:30. For those of you who are going to Oklahoma City to visit the Fairlawn Cemetery and the gravesite of Gebre Kristos Desta, your shuttle is arrived. And if you gather your belongings and go out the door at this side of the parking lot, you'll see the shuttle just adjacent to the dumpster that's in the next parking lot. Sorry, that's the best landmark that we have, but you'll see it. Our plan is to convene at the grave sites, and there will be an opportunity for anyone to share stories or memories or read poems. And then that shuttle will take us on to a nearby church where we will have dinner together, catered by the Queen of Sheba restaurant, the Ethiopian restaurant that's in Oklahoma City. If anyone is driving separately than the shuttle, please let me or come and see me, and I'll make sure you know where the group is convening. But otherwise, we will join. So please, as soon as possible, head outside and hop on the shuttle. Yeah, question? Yes, and the shuttle will bring you back after dinner. Any other questions? Okay, thank you so much, everyone.